Judges chapter 7. Early the next morning, Gideon and his army got up and moved their camp to Fear Spring. The Midianite camp was to the north, in the valley at the foot of Moreh Hill. The Lord said, Gideon, your army is too big. I can't let you win with this many soldiers. The Israelites would think that they had won the battle all by themselves and that I didn't have anything to do with it. So call your troops together and tell them that anyone who is really afraid can leave Mount Gilead and go home. 22,000 men returned home, leaving Gideon with only 10,000 soldiers. Gideon, the Lord said, you still have too many soldiers. Take them down to the spring and I'll test them. I'll tell you which one can go along with you and which one must go back home. When Gideon led his army down to the spring, the Lord told him, watch how each man gets a drink of water. Then divide them into two groups, those who lap the water like a dog and those who kneel down to drink. 300 men scooped up water in their hands and lapped it, and the rest knelt to get a drink. The Lord said, Gideon, your army will be made up of everyone who lapped the water from their hands. Send the others home. I am going to rescue Israel by helping you and your army of 300 defeat of Midianites. Then Gideon gave these orders, you 300 men stay here, the rest of you may go home, but leave your food and trumpets with us. Gideon's army camp was on top of a hill looking the Midianite camp in the valley. That night the Lord said to Gideon, get up, attack the Midianite camp. I am going to tell you defeat them, but if you are still afraid, you and your servant Purah should sneak down to their camp. When you hear what the Midianites are saying, you'll be brave enough to attack. Gideon and Purah worked their way to the edge of the enemy camp where soldiers were on guard duty. The camp was huge. The Midianites, Amalekites, and the other eastern nations covered the valley with a swarm of locusts, and it would be easier to count the grains of sand on a beach than to count their camels. Gideon overheard one enemy guard telling another, I had a dream about a flat loaf of barley bread that came tumbling into our camp. It hit the headquarters tent. And the tent flipped over and fell down. The other soldier answered, your dream must have been about Gideon, the Israelite commander. It means God will let him and his army defeat the Midianite army and everyone else in a camp. As soon as Gideon heard about the dream and what it meant, he bowed down to praise God. Then he went back to the Israelite camp and shouted, let's go, the Lord is going to let us defeat the Midianite army. Gideon divided his little army into 3 groups of 100 men, and he gave each soldier a trumpet and a large clay jar with a burning torch inside. Gideon said, when we get to the enemy camp, spread out and surround it. Then wait for me to blow a signal on my trumpet. As soon as you hear it, blow your trumpets and shout, fight for the Lord, fight for Gideon. Gideon and his group reached the edge of the enemy camp a few hours dark. Just after the new guards had come on duty, Gideon and his soldiers blew their trumpets and smashed the clay jars that were hiding the torches. The rest of Gideon's soldiers blew the trumpets they were holding in their right hands. Then they smashed the jars and held the burning torches in their left hands. Everyone shouted, fight with your swords for the Lord and for Gideon. The enemy soldiers started yelling and tried to run away. Gideon's troops stayed in their positions surrounding the camp and blew their trumpets again. As they did, the Lord made the enemy soldiers pull out their swords and start fighting each other. The enemy army tried to escape from the camp. They ran to Acacia Tree Town towards Zereda, and as far as the edge of the land that belonged to the town of Abel Meholah near Tabbath. Gideon sent word for more Israelite soldiers to come from the tribes of Naphtali, Asher, and both the halves of Manasseh to help fight the Midianites. He also sent messengers to tell all the men who lived in the hill country of Ephraim, "Come and help us fight the Midianites. Put guards at every spring stream as well as far as Beth Barah, before the Midianites can get to them, and guard the Jordan River." Troops from Ephraim did exactly what Gideon had asked, and they even helped chase the Midianites on the east side of the Jordan River. These troops captured Raven and Wolf, and the two Midianite leaders. They killed Raven at the large rock that has come to be known as Raven Rock, and they killed a wolf near a wine pit that has come to be called Wolf Wine Pit. The men of Ephraim brought the heads of the two Midianite leaders to Gideon. Judges chapter 8. But the men were really upset with Gideon and complained, "When you went to the war with Midian, you didn't ask us to help. Why did you treat us like that?" Gideon answered, "Don't be upset. Even though you came later, you were able to do much more than I did. It's just like the grape harvest. The grapes your tribe doesn't even bother to pick are better than the best grapes my family can grow. Besides, God chose you to capture Raven and Wolf. I didn't do any, and I didn't do a thing compared to you." By the time Gideon had finished talking, the men of Ephraim had calmed down and were no longer angry at him. After Gideon and his 300 troops had chased the Midianites as far as the Jordan River, they were exhausted. The town of Succoth was nearby, so he went there and asked, "Please give my troops some food. They are worn out, but we have to keep chasing Zebah and Zalmunna, the two Midianite kings." The two leaders of Succoth answered, "Why should we feed your army? We don't know if you really will defeat Zebah and Zalmunna." "Just wait," Gideon said. "After the Lord helps me defeat them, I'm coming back here. I'll make a whip out of thorns and rip the flesh from your bones." After leaving Succoth, Gideon went to Peniel and asked the leaders there for some food, but he got the same answer as he had got at Succoth. "I'll come back safe and sound," Gideon said. "But when I do, I am going to tear down your tower." Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor with an army of 15,000 troops. They were all that was left of the army of the eastern nations, because 120,000 of their warriors had been killed in the battle. Gideon reached the enemy camp by going east along Nomad road past Nobah and Jogbehah. He made a surprise attack and the enemy panicked. Zebah and Zalmunna tried to escape, but Gideon chased and captured them. After the battle, Gideon set out for home. As he was going through Heres Pass, he caught a young man who lived in Succoth. Gideon asked him who the town officials of Succoth were, and the young man wrote down 77 names. Gideon went to the town officials and said, "Here are Zebah and Zalmunna. Remember how you made fun of me? You said, 'We don't know if you really will defeat those two Midianite kings. So why should we feed your worn out army?'" Gideon made a whip from thorn plants and used it to beat the town officials. Afterwards, he went to Peniel, where he tore down the tower and killed all the town officials there. Then Gideon said, "Zebah and Zalmunna, tell me about the men who killed at Tabor. They were a lot like you." The two kings answered. They were dignified, almost like royalty. "They were my very own brothers," Gideon said. "I swear by the living Lord that if you had let them live, I would let you live." Gideon turned to Jether, his oldest son. "Kill them," Gideon said, but Jether was young, and he was too afraid to even pull out his sword. "What's the matter, Gideon?" Zebah and Zalmunna asked. "Do it yourself if you are not too much of a coward." Gideon jumped up and killed them both. Then he took the fancy gold ornaments from the necks of the camels. After the battle with the Midianites, the Israelites said, "Gideon, you rescued us. Now we want you to be our king. Then after your death, your son and then your grandson will rule." "No," Gideon replied, "I won't be your king, and my son won't be king either. Only the Lord is your ruler. But I will ask you to do one thing. Give me all the earrings you took from the enemy." The enemy soldiers had been Ishmaelites, and they were gold earrings. "But I will ask you to do one thing. Give me all the earrings you took from the enemy." The enemy soldiers had been Ishmaelites, and they wore gold earrings. The Israelite soldiers replied, "Of course we will give you the earrings." Then they spread out a robe on the ground and tossed the earrings on it. The total weight of the gold was over 40 pounds. In addition, there was the gold from the camels' ornaments and from the beautiful jewelry worn by the Midianite kings. Gideon also took their purple robes. Gideon returned to his home in Ophrah and had a gold made into a statue, which the Israelites soon started worshipping. They became unfaithful to God, and even Gideon and his family were trapped into worshipping the statue. The Midianites had been defeated so badly that they were no longer strong enough to attack Israel, and so Israel was at peace for the remaining 40 years of Gideon's life. Gideon had many wives and 70 sons. He even had a wife who lived at Shechem. They had a son, and Gideon named him Abimelech. Gideon lived to be an old man, and when he died, he was buried in the family tomb in his hometown of Ophrah, which belonged to the Abiezer clan. Soon after Gideon's death, the Israelites turned their backs on God again. They set up idols of Baal and worshipped Baal-berith as their god. The Israelites forgot that the Lord was their God and that He had rescued them from the enemies who lived around them. Besides all that, the Israelites were unkind to Gideon's family, even though Gideon had done so much for Israel. Judges chapter 9. Abimelech, the son of Gideon, went to Shechem. While there, he met with his mother's relatives and told them to say to the leaders of Shechem, "Do you think it would be good to have all 70 of Gideon's sons ruling us? Wouldn't you rather have just one man be king? Abimelech would make a good king, and he related to us." Abimelech's uncles talked it over with the leaders of Shechem, who agreed, "Yes, it would be better for one of our relatives to be king." Then they gave Abimelech 70 pieces of silver from the temple of their god Baal-berith. Abimelech used the silver to hire a gang of rough soldiers who would do anything for money. Abimelech and his soldiers went to his father's home in Ophrah and brought out Gideon's other sons to a large rock, where they murdered all 70. Gideon's younger son Jotham hid from the soldiers, but he was the only one who escaped. The leaders of Shechem, including the priests and the military officers, met at the tree next to the sacred rock in Shechem to crown Abimelech king. Jotham heard what they were doing, so he climbed to the top of Mount Gerizim and shouted down to the people who were there at the meeting, "Leaders of Shechem, listen to me, and maybe God will listen to you." Once the trees searched for someone to be king, they asked the olive tree, "Will you be our king?" But the olive tree replied, "My oil brings honor to people and gods. I won't stop making oil just to have my branches wave above the other trees." Then they asked the fig tree, "Will you be our king?" But the fig tree replied, "I won't stop growing my delicious fruit just to have my branches wave above the other trees." Next, they asked the grapevine, Will you be our king? But the grapevine replied, My wine brings cheer to people and gods. I won't stop making wine just to have my branches wave above the other trees. Finally, they went to the thorn bush and asked, Will you be our king? The thorn bush replied, If you really want me to be your king, then come into my shade and I will protect you. But if you are deceiving me, I'll start a fire that will spread out and destroy the cedars of Lebanon. After Jotham had finished telling the story, he said, My father Gideon risked his life for you when he fought to rescue you from the Midianites. Did you reward Gideon by being kind to his family? No, you did not. You attacked his family and killed all 70 of his sons on that rock. And was it right to make Abimelech your king? He's merely the son of my father's slave girl. But just because he's your relative, you made him king of Shechem. So, you leaders of Shechem, if you treated Gideon and his family the way you should have, then I hope you, Abimelech, will make each other very happy. But if it was wrong to treat Gideon and his family the way you did, then I pray that Abimelech will destroy you with fire, and I pray that you will do the same to him. Jotham ran off and went to live in the town of Beer, where he could be safe from his brother Abimelech. Abimelech had been a military commander of Israel for 3 years. When God decided to punish him and the leaders of Shechem for killing Gideon's 70 sons, so God turned the leaders of Shechem against Abimelech. Then they sent some men to hide on the hilltops and watch for Abimelech and his troops, while they sent others to rob everyone that went by on the road. But Abimelech found out that what they were doing. One day, Gaal, son of Ebed, went to live in Shechem. His brothers moved there too, and soon the leaders of Shechem started trusting him. The time came for the grape harvest, and the people of Shechem went into their vineyard and picked the grapes. They put the grapes in the wine pits and worked on them to squeeze out the juice in order to make wine. Then they went into the temple of their god and threw a big party. There was a lot of eating and drinking, and before long they were cursing. Abimelech, Gaal said, Hamor was the founder of Shechem, and one of his descendants should be our ruler. But Abimelech's father was Gideon, so Abimelech isn't really one of us. He shouldn't be our king, and we shouldn't have to obey him or Zubal, who rules Shechem, for him. If I were the ruler of Shechem, I would get rid of Abimelech. I would tell him, Get yourself a bigger army and we will still defeat you. Zubal was angry when he found out what Gaal had said, and so sent some messengers to Abimelech. But when they had to pretend to be doing something else, or they would not have been allowed to leave Shechem, Zubal told the messengers to say, Gaal, the son of Ebed, has come to Shechem along with his brothers, and they have persuaded the people to let Gaal rule Shechem instead of you. This is what I think you should do. Lead your army here during the night and hide in the fields. Get up the next morning at sunrise and rush out of your hiding places to attack the town. Gaal and his followers will come out to fight you, but you will easily defeat them. So one night, Abimelech led his soldiers to Shechem. He divided them into 4 groups, and they all hid near the town. The next morning, Gaal went out and stood in the opening of the town gate. Abimelech and his soldiers left their hiding places, and Gaal saw them. Zebul was standing there with Gaal, and Gaal remarked, Zebul, that looks like a crowd of people coming down from the mountaintops. No, Zebul answered, it's just the shadow of the mountains. It only looks like people moving. But Zebul, look over there, Gaal said, there's a crowd coming down from the sacred mountain, and another group is coming along the road from the tree where people talk with the spirits of the dead. Then Zubal replied, "What good is all of your bragging now? You were the one who said Abimelech shouldn't be the ruler of Shechem. Out there is the army that you made fun of. So go out and fight them." Gaal and the leaders of Shechem went out and fought Abimelech. Soon the people of Shechem turned and ran back into the town. However, Abimelech and his troops were close behind the king and killed many of them along the way. Abimelech stayed at Arumah, and Zubal forced Gaal and his brothers out of Shechem. The next morning, the people of Shechem were getting ready to work in the fields as usual, but someone told Abimelech about it. Abimelech divided his army into 3 groups and set up an ambush in the fields near Shechem. When the people came out of the town, he and his army rushed out from their hiding places and attacked. Abimelech and the troops with him ran to the town gate and took control of it, while 2 other groups attacked and killed the people who were in the fields. He and his troops fought in Shechem all day until they had killed everyone in towns. Then he and his men tore down the houses and buildings and scattered salt everywhere. Earlier that day, the leaders of the temple of El Bereth at Shechem had heard about the attack. So they went into the temple fortress, but Abimelech found out where they were. He led his troops of Mount Zalmon, where he took an axe and chopped off a tree branch. He lifted the branch onto his shoulder and shouted, "Hurry, cut off a branch just as I did." When they all had branches, they followed Abimelech back to Shechem. They piled the branches against the fortress and set them on fortress and killing about the Abimelech back at Shechem. They piled the branches against the fortress and set them on fire, burning down the fortress and killing about 1,000 men and women. After destroying Shechem, Abimelech went to Thebez. He surrounded the town and captured it. But there was a tall fortress in the middle of the town, and the town leaders and everyone else went inside. Then they barred the gates and went up to the flat roof. Abimelech and his army rushed to the fortress and tried to force their way inside. Abimelech himself was about to set the heavy wooden doors on fire when a woman on the roof dropped a large rock on his head and cracked his skull. The soldier who carried his weapons was nearby, and Abimelech told him, "Take out your sword and kill me. I don't want people to say that I was killed by a woman." So the soldier ran his sword through Abimelech. And when the Israelite soldiers saw that their leader was dead, they went back home. That's how God punished Abimelech for killing his brothers and bring shame on his father's family. God also punished the people of Shechem for helping Abimelech. Everything happened just as Jotham's curse said it would.